Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about a special topic which is on generative AI in life science. And I'm going to show you about how we can build production ready generative AI solutions. So before we jump onto the agenda part, let me talk about myself. I'm a data science leader with 17 plus years of experience, and I have exposure to different domains within IT, retail, and pharma. At present, I'm working with Novartis. It's in Hyderabad, India, and I played up global roles within this company. And I have a proven track record of driving AI innovation and scaling large-scale data science solutions. Regarding my education, I'm a BTech graduate from IIT Madras and an MBA from SPJ, and I'm recently got an awardee for from the Analytics India magazine for this year 2020 as 40 under 40 data scientist. Along with this, I do write some blogs and articles, especially on statistics, AI, and generative AI recently. And I also deliver some talks at conferences and in internal forums on AI and data science. And I'm also fond of a lot of activities around hackathons and all. And I'm a Kaggle expert, and I participated in a lot many hackathon platforms across the world. And that's how I make myself learn in a quicker and faster pace. So, like coming into the topic, what do we discuss today? Let's have a look at like how the evolution of generative AI has started, and what are the generative AI use cases and applications, and we'll look at what are the multiple generative AI approaches that are using LLM, and what is the best approach to use LLMs in business applications. Finally, we will look at the challenges that we have if we want to develop a generative AI application, and also we'll close with the architecture solutions that can be there for any generative AI solution. So let's look at the evolution of generative AI. At present, we are in a stage where the machines can not only analyze data, but they can also create it. Right? They can create images, they can create text and videos as well. Now, if you look at the evolution, right, it's all started with artificial intelligence in the early 50s and 60s. It's basically all about making intelligent machines, and it comes under the broader field of developing machines that actually can replicate the human behavior. It includes all the aspects of reasoning, learning, and the problem solving. And within the subset of artificial intelligence, we have this machine learning, which actually uses some advanced algorithms, wherein it looks at the large data sets and find out the patterns around it, and it builds approximate models of the real systems. Next, we have the deep learning, which is a subset of machine learning. Basically, it uses neural networks to model the real systems by actually mimicking the human behavior or human brain on how it works. And it utilizes a lot of millions of computational neurons in order to work. And finally, we have a subset of deep learning, which is the current trend that we are in, which is called the generative AI. It's a subfield that comes in deep learning. This actually uses a huge neural network kind of models, like where it can go from millions of neurons to billions of neurons, and it is quite adept at learning abstractive patterns through the transformer models, which is the backbone of the LLM, I would say. And it actually produces text, pictures, audio, and videos. Now let's look at like how this is generative AI is transforming. Generative AI is expected to actually produce 60 billion to 110 billion billion dollar value in annual value across the pharmaceutical industry value chain. And one of the articles which I got from the McKinsey shows that the commercial side of things has around 18 to 30 billion-dollar value that can be generated. And whatever you see in this chart, it's basically the life stages of pharmaceutical value chains. It can vary from commercial, research and early discovery, and operations. Now let us look at some of the use cases that we can have, potential use cases, I would say, in various stages of development. And if you look at research and early discovery, clinical development, operations, commercial, medical affairs, there are other stages as well, but predominantly you could see that these are the five major stages. And personally, I have a majority of my experience was into commercial and operation side of things. Now, when it comes to the commercial side of things, I'll pick up some of the use cases wherein from the commercial side we can analyze market trends and competitor data to actually inform the pricing strategies and market access plans. And we can also do some personalization or optimized promotional activity in this commercial domain Basically, if you want to target HCPs, right, like healthcare professionals, those HCPs act like a key opinion leaders. Like if we have some mechanism to identify those key opinion leaders, we would be able to get a good ROI analysis with whatever the promotional activity that we would be doing. So generative AI can definitely help in that area. And when it comes to the clinical development, we will be having a lot of data related to electronic health records, right? So we could actually use this data to identify suitable candidates for the clinical trials. And we can also do some activities around summarizing the patient records, automating the clinical note taking, and in advance we can generate the diagnostic report for a particular patient. And when it comes to the operation side, we can have some accounting guidance from the finance team, or people and organization, or the legal team, to generate some insights from whatever the business functions we'll be working on. Now, having considered all these stages, right now, what is the powerhouse behind generating this generative AI solutions? LLM. LLM stands for large language model. Now, if you look at what are the multiple generative AI approaches, first, if we look at the four stages which I'm showing right now in this PPT, we can start off with building your own large language model. So here we already have very famous models like Bloomberg GPT and BioGPT. If you look at the Bloomberg GPT, it is actually trained on finance data. Uh, it's very much focused on the domain data, right? The entire model is being trained by using only the finance data. Similarly, for BioGPT, it has used a lot of literature around life sciences domain. And then we have next models related to closed source model. These models are actually called as proprietary models, which are from OpenAI, Claude, or Gemini. And next we have the open source models, which are hosted on premise, like where it is coming from Llama model, Mistral model. So these are all open source models, right? There is no cost that is involved. But when we compare with the closed source model, there is some cost that is involved in order to utilize those models in our generative AI solution. And finally, we have the fine-tuned version of open source model. Like what we could do over here is, like, we can take an open source model, we can either from the Llama family or a Mistral family, we can fine tune on top of it with your respective domain of data that you are working on, whether it can be a task of question answering or summarization or anything. You can fine tune by using the open source models. And some of the examples are like Bluebird, Medlem, and Medbug. And let's look at how the maturity of using an LLM has started. As we all know that in the year 2022, in the November month, all got to know that ChatGPT got released, right? So once this ChatGPT is into the market, the way people have started using it is like they started using it as a direct prompting, right? You just enter a prompt and you try to get an answer from it. Then we went into a next stage where we call it as a prompt engineering, and then we developed some custom chatbots with all the prompt engineering methods, whatever we have learned. And then we try to solve the traditional NLP problems. Like, when I say traditional NLP problems, it can be a summarization task or a classification task. Out of the box, we got some answers by using these LLM models, especially from the OpenAI model. And now we are in the present generation where we are applying the generative AI solutions by using RAG technology and the new kid in the market, which is agentic AI. So by combination of all these things, now we are able to develop the generative AI solutions. And as you can see, this is how the maturity has happened in terms of using an LLM. Now, what is the best approach to using LLMs in business applications? There are four different stages here, right? We can just start off with prompt engineering. What happens here is the user asks a question, and he uses the pre-trained large language model, which is already existing, and he gets the response. It basically refines the model input to guide its output. Next, we have the RAG solution. So in this case, what happens is we already have a pre-trained large language model, and on top of it, we add some external database as a knowledge base to this. And then when any user asks a query, it combines the knowledge base that is there, and then the concise information or the response comes from the pre-trained model that we are using. And again, it goes back. The response goes back to the user. Next, we have the PEFT method, right? Parameter efficient fine tuning. So basically what happens is you have a pre-trained model. Instead of training the entire pre-trained model, we will be focusing on only some of the parameters. Like, for example, if the model is like having 10 billion parameter model, like we don't need to train all the 10 billion parameters. We'll be just focusing on only some millions of parameters. So this is what the parameter efficient fine tuning does. And finally, we have the full fine tuning of the data. Now, as I said, the 10 billion parameter model is being used. If I have to retrain everything, I will be using all the 10 billion parameters to get updated, and it's actually a costly task, I would say, and a time-consuming process as well to in order to utilize it. But every case has its own utilization in the business application. So we need to decide like where our business case lies and what do we require. And we also need to know about what is the right approach for the business application. So in the previous slide, you might have seen the different stages of how we can utilize it. Now we will see some different attributes and what we need to focus on. For example, it can be of cost of implementation, domain specific, transparency, avoiding hallucinations, what is the complexity of the problem you are solving, and what do you need to really get up-to-date responses. So if you look at all these six attributes, right, then you have your own vision for your organization, that how what kind of product you want to develop. Let's say, for example, if you want to develop a product where you want to avoid hallucination, but I want up-to-date responses. So the best method is here is like by looking at this chart, it shows RAG application, right? Now there might be some other application in a particular domain or a function. What they require is they want the entire domain data needs to be utilized within the organization. They don't want the data should go outside, or any training if they are doing, they wanted to do it with its own data. So in that case, maybe a PEFT or a full fine tuning of the methodology can be the right approach. Again, it all depends upon the business application. If the business is saying that they are least worried about the cost, or they are least worried about the complexity of the solution, I think the best is like they can go with the PEFT or full fine tuning. So in a nutshell, the right approach actually depends upon the business application they are doing. Now let's look at the complexity and the risk, how it is involved in deploying a generative AI solution. Right? I have two parameters here in terms of adoption and grounding. And in terms of adoption, the less complexity thing comes from the bottom, right? When you have your own pre-trained foundation model, there is a less complexity that is involved because it's already trained, right? And then the RAG solution comes up, and then we can have an instruction-based fine-tuning and domain adoption, and you can build your own model from scratch. So basically, if you look at the risk side of things, if you have a pre-trained model, there is a higher risk. But if you want to develop your own model from scratch within your organization, because you set your own boundaries and you have your own governance rules and all, so it is much of a lower risk, I would say. Now let us look at how does any AI use case moves from proof of value to production part, right? Now this is how the AI use case will be moving. First, we'll be having the demand management. So here is the place where we go to the customers and or the stakeholders, and we show the demand for you get the demand from the customers, and then you evaluate the business use case, right? And this evaluation can take weeks or months. And then once you are finalized about the business use case, then you'll go to the proof of value stage or a proof of concept stage. This is the stage where you might take around, again, based on the situation, 2 months or 3 months. Suppose, let's say the idea is to have the proof of value for 2 or 3 countries, it might take lesser time. But if you want to develop the solution for 100 plus countries, it might take more time. Again, it depends. Now once we are satisfied with the proof of value or the proof of concept, then next stage comes the pre-industrialization phase. And this is where you again revisit the proof of value stage, and you retest the results what you are getting in the proof of value. And finally, we push this pre-industrialized product into industrialization product, and this is where we automate and scale. And final handover which needs to be done to the operations team, where they run it and transfer the product to the designated business team, right? So this is how it transitions, basically from going from demand management to POV, and then again moving to production. Now, let's look at this question on like, are all generative AI POCs moving to production? Actually, it's not. Like, I have read some of the reports from the Gartner and Deloitte. It actually says that 30% of the generative AI use cases will get abandoned after proof of concept by the end of 2025. And there are various reasons that they are quoting. Reasons are data quality, inadequate risk controls, and some other reasons, right? And the similar is the case from the Deloitte report as well. And do we see any challenges? Absolutely, there are a lot of challenges here. Well, let's look at what are the hurdles for a generative AI POC moving to production, right? I mainly categorized these hurdles into three categories. It is into quality, governance, and efficiency. So when it comes to quality, right, it is important that we have to reduce the hallucinations, right? Whenever we are using open source models, or any model, generative AI model, there is a high chance that hallucination can happen. So we might need to reduce that hallucination by putting some certain guardrails. And also there might be a high chance that there might be irrelevant answers, incomplete answers, poor summaries. So all this related to quality. Now coming to the governance side of things, you should have your own set of security rules, privacy, and there needs to be certain guardrails to protect the data. And coming to the efficiency side of things, yes, cost does matter to the business. Along with that, another important thing is the latency, right? Like for example, if you are asking ChatGPT a particular question, we should not expect that the answer comes after 1 or 2 minutes, right? We will expect the answer needs to come in like few seconds. So the latency becomes a major factor for the customer satisfaction. So we might need to take care of this efficiency factor as well. Now, what are the possible solutions to address all these things? When it comes to the quality side of things, we can have our own content filtering systems, and also we can have certain fact checking mechanisms where you can have your own systems where it checks the factuality of the data. And also you can have your own prompts that can encourage the AI to provide sources or confidence levels for its responses. And from the governance side, once you have the data, right, and if you say that the data is confidential, you can have your own anonymization techniques and some de-identification techniques. You can use it, and you can have certain governance rules over there. And from coming to the efficiency side of things, we can have certain quantization techniques and the caching strategies, basically to reduce the API calls that happens in the production. And also you can have certain dashboards that you can build for monitoring purpose, where you will get some alerts related to token consumption and cost. So this way the efficiency can be improved. Now coming to the ML lifecycle workflow, right? It again divides into 4 stages. First stage is a data preparation, building and training the model, deployment of the model, and monitoring of the model. So here I have already listed down the roles and responsibilities of each and every stage, I would say. And in data preparation, there are certain roles who are responsible to do this, and what do they do. Like for example, for data preparation, data engineer, data modeler, analyst, they are basically helping to clean the data, transform the data, and access the data. And finally, for monitoring side of things, ML engineers are very much crucial along with DevOps engineers. They basically monitor the data drift, model metrics, and also if there is any A/B testing that needs to be done, it has to be done. So now, what is this LLM ops, right? Now, in the previous slide, you saw ML workflow, right? So we can consider that as an ML operation. But now the new technical term that has come in, which is called as LLM operations. So what is LLM operations? It is ML ops for large language models. Now let us look at the comparison of ML ops and LLM ops. Like for example, let's take assume that we want to classify medical research articles as relevant or irrelevant. Uh, Assuming that we are focusing on a specific topic like COVID-19 vaccine efficacy. Now, if you look at the ML models, right, how we prepare the outcome, we have the data ready and we do the model training. And in this model training, we have certain algorithms that we select. Along with that, we will have certain data labels that is mandatory for model training, right? So in this case, the data labels are relevant or irrelevant. Now, um, how do you get the outcome? You run the model. Maybe you use some supervised technique models like random forest or XGBoost, anything, and then you get an outcome, right? But in the case of LLM models, the workflow remains same. We have the data, we have the model training, and we have the outcome. We get the outcome as well. But how do you get the outcome? It's basically by using the pre-trained models. Here in this case, we can use pre-trained models as GPT-4o or Llama models. But there are certain issues, right? If we can look at, if you are using LLM models, there is some problem like hallucination or prompt injection related issues. But when you are looking at ML models, it's more related to model drift or a data drift, or there can be a model bias. So these kind of things that can happen. Now, this is the LLM's life cycle workflow looks like. It has, again, similar stages like what I have shown in the previous slides, ML life cycle workflow, which has data preparation, building and training the model, deployment, and monitoring. Right? So if you look at here, we just have this prompt engineering and fine tuning is the one which has been added, but rest all the roles and responsibilities actually remain same. uh, based on the platform you are using. Like for example, if you are using Microsoft Azure, GCP, or AWS, based on the expertise, the roles might change a little bit, but the workflow remains same. So what is the technology stack that is required for this generative AI solution? So here is the stack, right? We need to have a good infrastructure layer. Again, it depends upon the business. Like in our case, we are using Azure as the platform for infrastructure layer, and the foundation models we are utilizing GPT 4.0 and other vision models as well, based on the requirement what we have. And then we have integration layer, core agent logic layer, and orchestration layer as well. Like now the trend is on agents, right? We can have different agentic workflows, like we can use it LangGraph, AutoGen, or QAI. And finally, to project your outcome onto the interface, we can have a UI or a UX component added to it. And for a quick proof of value or a proof of concept, we can use Streamlit or a Gradio. But if your organization requires something fancy UI related things, maybe you could use React based applications, right? And let's move on to the next slide. So here is where I'm talking about the architecture layer. So for developing a generative AI solutions, I would say these are the 5 layers that are very, very important: the application layer, a governance layer, a data layer, model layer, and a hosting layer. So all these layers combined will become a complete architecture for a generative AI solution. Now let's look at each layer and what all components does it has. So if you look at the architecture layers and the components, right? In application layers, we have the Azure API management, and we have certain functions. So here in this architecture layers, I'm actually using services of Microsoft Azure. Maybe if someone is using AWS or GCP, it's the same thing. The services might remain same with the different namings, but the actual functionality of working, it remains same. Right. So now coming to the governance layer, we have to have Azure policies that needs to be set up, Azure Active Directory. How are the private keys that are being saved, and how do we monitor it? Similarly, for data layer, we have a blob storage, Cosmos DB, vector database. And from the model layer side of things, what Azure OpenAI services are we using? And the hosting layer, whether are we using GPU enabled virtual machines or any other machines. So a combination of all these layers together will form a perfect architecture for the solution. Now, the most important thing that we need to look at whenever we are developing a generative AI solution is how is our data processing pipeline is fixed, right? So initially, if you look at here, we have the proprietary business documents that are there in our SharePoint or any repository. Uh, what we do over here is we kind of extract and split the entire information of the corpus that we have into chunks. So chunks are basically a small portions of text information, wherein, like, you have thousands of records of information. You basically split that information into small parts. Right now, these small parts of text are passed into an embedding model where we have to convert the text information into numeric format by using some embedding models. Either you can use OpenAI models or any open source models as well. And once we have this embedding stored in a vector format, along with that, you can also pass metadata for this particular database, and then we finally store that information to vector database. Again, here the vector database can be Azure AI Search or the Chroma database or any other paid or non-paid vector database we can use. So this is a data processing pipeline. This is very, very important. And we can also call this as a data refresh pipeline as well in the production, right? Like whenever any data comes into a particular SharePoint or a repository, we should be able to trigger any Lambda function or any Azure function to basically start working on this chunking of text and creating a vector database. So basically, this pipeline, you can name it as data refresh or a data processing pipeline. And now let's see like how this pipeline can be connected in the production. And the next point is on the inference pipeline, right? This is very, very important. This is where you are getting the outcome from the application to the user, right? It contains majorly 3 layers, I would say. One is the front end layer, second is the middle layer, and the back end layer, right? So middle and back end layer are controlled by the application layer here. So here is what it is happening in the front end layer. Whenever any user asks a question, whether it's on a user interface or any mobile application, the question will go to the application layer, and here is where the data layer and the model layer work together data layer is the one where they collect the data, and then the vector search happens along with the model layer. Finally, the response will go into the hosting layer, and then it goes to the production endpoint, and finally the response comes back to the user. So this is how it is being done, and in this process there is also a validation check that we need to do. It's a governance layer wherein it tries to look at how uh, your data is protected. Are there any ethical things that has been covered or not? So these kind of things or security checks needs to be checked. So all these things will happen in the governance layer, right? So this is the inference pipeline. Now, in the previous slide, we have seen the data refresh or a data processing pipeline. A combination of all these things will actually help for a good production level, product, I would say. And now, if you look at the final product, right? We always want the final product to be without any errors or risk. But actually, whenever you're developing a generative solution, there is a chance that there can be some risks, but we might never eliminate those kind of risks. Like, what we could do is we can definitely strive to mitigate them to an acceptable level. But hopefully, if you have those guardrails that are set up from your organization, and you are also following the responsible AI metrics, so definitely we can come to a conclusion that our generative AI solution will be a successful product with some minimal risks, right? I think more or less I covered everything. So thank you very much for looking at this presentation. Thank you.